Before we actually start writing code using Express, it's a good idea for us to understand what Express is. And we're going to do that through diagramming out how Express works with Node and our operating system in order to interact with our hardware and communicate across the internet. And then we're going to talk about how Express acts as a framework for building our own custom JavaScript applications. We're going to start that off by diagramming out how this all works together. So let's begin with the fact that we have a computer, and our computer is made up of hardware. So let's get that out there first. So this yellow represents the computer itself, or everything that is contained within a computer. So let's go ahead and label that as our computer. Now, our computer is a composition of hardware that allows us to do things in the physical world, as well as software, which allows us to control that hardware that lives in the physical world. And for that, we're going to go ahead and let's mark off this bottom area. Oops, I need my... Here we go. The bottom area right here is going to be the hardware in our computer. So we've got ourselves some hardware right here. And then to control that hardware, we usually don't let applications or code written by others directly access the hardware. Instead, we have a middleman that sits in between all of our applications and the hardware, and that is our operating system. And our operating system, it sits right here, and it is what governs and controls access to our hardware. So we've got ourselves our operating system right here. And again, it governs and controls access to the hardware. Now, on top of that, we can have a ton of different applications installed on our computer. And a lot of times, those applications are written by third parties. And so those third parties, they allow us to use that software that they build to accomplish specific goals. So, for example, we may have installed on our computer, let's use a different color so that we can actually see that these are third-party pieces of software. We may have something like a Word document over here, and we are using the Microsoft Word program right here. So we'll do MS Word for Microsoft Word. We've got a Microsoft Word document open. And this application right here was spun up by the operating system when we double-clicked on a Word document or when we opened Microsoft Word manually on our own. The cool thing is the operating system, what it does is it spins up this very protected little area inside of the world of our computer, and it allows Microsoft Word to operate inside the bounds of this little world. So let's say that this orange area is the world that our operating system spun up for that application to run in. And then the application that is actually running, so Microsoft Word itself, it lives inside of this little world. And we're going to go ahead and make that blue so that we can see the difference here. So we've got the Microsoft World, and then we've got the actual application Microsoft that is in blue. And it runs inside of this container that the operating system spun up. And it can only operate within this world. And what we're doing here is we are isolating programs one from another so that they don't negatively impact each other. In other words, they have their own place to operate. They have their own process that's operating them. And they have their own memory, and we have isolated them from each other so that they can't mess each other up. So Microsoft Word, maybe we've got another one over here. Oops, we need to go back to our square to show the isolated world that we've got. Maybe we open up another program, and that would be, maybe it's the Chrome browser. So we've got Chrome open, and then inside of the Chrome world, we're going to have the actual Chrome application running for accessing the web. And it is going to live inside of this little world here with its own memory access. And anytime it needs to pull a web page, it's going to have to talk to our operating system. And the operating system is going to determine if it is allowed to talk to our hardware. So let's go ahead and show some communication here. We're going to have our Chrome make a request for a web page. It has to come down here and ask the operating system, hey, operating system, I would really like to be able to get to the network card. So let's go ahead and put our network card, And the network card, if you want to use the technical jargon that we use for it, a network card is going to be called a NIC. So let's go ahead and put a NIC right here. Got ourselves our NIC. And I'm going to use the NIC because we are going to have a lot of communication with the NIC that's going to have to go through our operating system in this example here that we're doing. So Chrome says, hey, I would like to go to www.neumont.edu. So let's say this is the request. So Neumont.edu is the request. It wants to go there. So it has to ask the operating system. And then the operating system's, yeah, you can use the NIC. So the operating system then says, okay, you can use the NIC to make a call. And then the request goes out to the internet over our network. So with this isolation that happens and these individual processes and memory spaces that we get in order to isolate programs, well, Node is just like another program running on our computer. It is actually just another application running on our computer, and when we start up an Express application or anything that we've written in JavaScript, and we use the command on the terminal in our computer where we write node, and then a lot of times it's index.js, or it could be server.js, or it could be app.js. Anyways, whenever we execute this code in our operating system's terminal, that's why it's down here in the operating system, is because we're using the terminal to execute this code. What we're really doing is we're saying, hey, node, well, we're saying, hey, operating system, I would like to spin up a new Node application, and the entry point into that application is this file, index.js, or server.js, or app.js, whichever you're using. And when we execute this inside of the terminal, what happens is the operating system then says, oh, all right, well, let's go ahead and spin up ourselves another process in order to run this Node application. Now, the operating system and Node don't really care that this might be an Express application or it might just be a regular Node JavaScript application that we've written. It just knows that we need a Node execution environment in which our application can run. So just like it spun up an environment for Microsoft Word or it spun up an environment for Microsoft Chrome, what it's going to do is it is going to spin up another process, and I'm going to make this one bigger, not because Node is bigger than Word or Chrome, just because we might be showing a little bit more detail in here on how things work. So when we get that request to spin up a new Node application, the operating system creates a new Node process and then gives it its own area to execute. Now, inside of that area, we're going to have the actual application running that lives inside of this Node environment. And in this instance, we are talking about an Express application that we are going to have running in here. And so most of the time, that Express application is going to be running some sort of web application or web API. So let's say that it is a web API that is running in here, and it's our custom web API for our application that we're building. So maybe it's a shopping cart, or maybe it's a informational website, a blogging website, something. And that API lives in here, and that API is actually running inside of Express, right? So with that, we've got our new Express application running inside of its own context here. And then when it needs to make requests to go on the internet to send information back and forth across HTTP, it, of course, has to go through the operating system to get to that network card. Now, another cool thing about an Express application is that because it is a web server, in other words, it's going to handle HTTP gets, puts, posts, and deletes. In other words, it's going to handle HTTP requests. A cool thing about Express is that it will actually ask the operating system if it can be bound to a particular port in order to have direct communication with the internet. So right here, it's going to ask the operating system, can I please be bound to port 80? Or it could be for local development, port 3000, port 8080, or port 8888. Those are all common ports that our computer uses in order to give an application direct connection to the network card to listen on for requests that come into the network card, such as HTTP get, put, posts, and deletes. So it's going to ask the operating system, hey, operating system, can I please listen on the network card on port 80, 3000, 8080, or 8080, or 88888? And then the operating system is going to say, oh yeah, this port is not being used, so yeah, let's go ahead and let you have a direct binding to that port so that you can listen for any network traffic that comes in. And so then if we've got an API, an Express web application running, it is going to be listening on a particular port on our network. And then if a request happens to come in, let's go ahead and use blue. Now let's use green. Green is a network request. We've got a request that comes in here to the network card on port 80, which is what our API is listening to. And let's say that that request that is coming in is asking for a resource on port 80. So if we have our domain, it's www.myapp.com. And if we're running it on a port other than 80, let's say we're running on 3000 / and then it's asking for a resource. Maybe it's products, like that. Well, that request is coming in right here, and it is on port 3000, let's say. Well, because our web app is listening on port 3000 right here, then it is going to intercept that request. Oops, we just lost our request stuff here. So let's put that back there, and then let's go back to our text, and let's put www.myapp.com port 3000 / products. All right, so that's the request coming in. There we go. And then because the Express web app is listening on that port, that request, instead of going to Chrome or going to Microsoft Word, that request is going to end up going into our API, and the API is going to handle that request, and then it will be then sending a response back over that same, or to that calling client. So this client is probably coming from some browser on the internet, and that browser is on a computer that has a specific IP address. So if we want to go ahead and identify that, then this request is coming from some computer with a 255.311. This isn't a real IP address, I'm just kind of making it up. And they're not even close to the right ranges for an IP address. All right, so it's coming from some IP address, and then this Express API is then going to read that HTTP request, and then it is going to have some code in here that knows how to handle that HTTP request, and then a response to that request is then going to be sent back to whoever called it across the network using that network card. And then a response with all the products is going to go back to the machine with this IP address. Now this is a broad overview of number one, how the hardware with the operating system in conjunction with Node can build a isolated area for a Node process to begin running and executing our application that is written on top of Express, and how it can listen for network traffic on a particular port on our computer, and it can respond to that to the IP address of whoever is requesting that information. Really high level overview. There's a lot more to this than what I explained. This is really basic. Now let's talk about Express itself. Now Node by itself, this Node process that is running, Node doesn't really know how to handle HTTP. It doesn't really speak HTTP. And that is the protocol over which all of our requests and responses happen when we are running a web application over a web server. So in order for a Node application to be able to speak the HTTP protocol and handle HTTP GET, PUT, POSTS, and deletes, we have to have some kind of a framework that allows us to write application code and easily interpret HTTP requests and send back properly formatted HTTP responses. Now, if we didn't have Express, this web application framework, and we wanted to build something that actually handles HTTP, we would actually have to use all the networking libraries found inside of the Node API, and we would have to write code to understand HTTP requests, as well as create properly formatted HTTP responses. In other words, we would have to write code that allows our Node application to speak HTTP, to be both a translator and a speaker of HTTP. Well, if we had to do that with every single web application we write, it would be extremely tedious, and that code we would have to copy and paste from the last app we built. So the cool part is that the community, the Node community, when Node first became a really good programming platform, the community said, well, we're tired of rewriting all of this code that tells a Node application how to communicate over the network in HTTP. So then a group got together, and they had been writing web applications all the time, and they took all of that template code, in other words, all of that code that teaches a Node application how to read and write HTTP, and they bundled it up as a generic framework or a generic set of libraries that we can then use and pull into the code that we're writing so that our web application can understand how to speak HTTP across the network. And with that, all of this that we have here, let's go ahead and highlight everything that, because we have Express, we don't have to deal with as software developers, because it's dealt with under the hood through all of the cool stuff we get from Express. And really, it is all of this functionality that we went over that we don't have to deal with. This is all bundled into Express. And then really what that leaves for us to do is we can simply build all of the controllers and routers and all that stuff up here that holds our custom code, and we can use everything that Express provides us in order to communicate over an internet or over our network and interface with the operating system and the hardware, specifically the NIC, to do that communication over the network. We can allow Express to do that for us under the hood, and we get to just focus on how we are going to handle what is requested. So instead of dealing with URLs and mapping IP addresses and handling how to read HTTP headers and HTTP GET requests, posts, puts, and deletes, instead, Express takes care of all of that for us, and then we get to simply say, oh, well, if someone wants products, well, we're just going to go ahead and pull a list of all the products from our database, pump them into a page, or turn them into a JSON object, and then we will just go ahead and tell Express to push that across the internet back to the user. and we don't have to worry about all of this stuff that is going on under the hood. So Express really is our translator between HTTP. It handles all of our get, put, post, and deletes, reading the headers, writing the headers, setting up all the HTTP stuff that's going to go across the network. And it also handles all the incoming requests, reading all of those headers, reading the actual request itself, and then converting it into stuff that we can use in JavaScript. So if it's JSON that's coming in, it will take care of transmitting all of that stuff, turning it into JSON, and then allowing us to use it inside of our application. And then when we want to send something back, all we have to really say is response.send, and we can put the information in that we want to send, and then Express handles all of the sending. Hopefully that helps you understand what Express is and why we use Express in order to build web applications. It would be a really good idea to make sure that you go look up Express.js and read some of its documentation, read its overview, make sure that you understand how and why it works the way it does. And we're going to leave it right here with this basic overview of what Express is and what it does for us as software developers.